Do you think that these psychedelics help us to talk to God, that God is inside of us? We're all a sliver, a piece of God?
Yeah. I think that what humanity has called God for forever, and there's all sorts of different types of gods that humanity has described. I think it's the same thing that we talk to with psychedelics, that we tap into. And there's this really fascinating line of thought around tying the origins of most religions to psychedelics as sacrament. Even Christianity, using wine as sacrament in the early days of Christianity, there's evidence that wine was spiked with ergot, which is the same kind of underpinnings of what LSD is made out of. So it was likely that wine could have produced psychedelic-like experiences. And, I mentioned I grew up amongst the Mormons, and so I had always had a fascination with their history because it's such a young religion. And there's a lot of evidence that Joseph Smith, he always had a medicine person by his side. He was able to create mystical experiences within his congregation using sacraments that were created by his medicine person. And even the origin stories of Mormonism, Joseph Smith climbs this hill. He's in a pretty challenging emotional state, and he finds these golden tablets, and he reads the wisdom from them. And then they disappear. He talks to an angel. He comes down the mountain, and for 3 days he dictates the Book of Mormon to his friend, and while his wife is there. And I've opened the Book of Mormon and started reading it, and just imagining what someone who's coming down from a psychedelic experience might say. And I'm like, it's all here. It's beautiful. and it's wise in a lot of ways. But yeah, there's a lot of these really fun historical accounts of psychedelics and religion mixing.
This podcast is brought to you by B Micro, a company I'm deeply passionate about because I founded it in 2018. It's USDA organic freeze-dried microgreens for everyday nutrition and detox. Sprinkle them on any meal or take them as a capsule to enjoy the many healthy benefits. Shop now at bmicro.farm. Use code STEVE15 to save. Yeah, share some of those with us, or even farther back. There's the Stoned Ape Theory.
Yeah. That
we have been consuming these mushrooms for millions of years, and that has helped us to develop our brain at a really rapid pace.
Yeah, I love that theory. When I think about what makes humans different from other animals and mammals, it's my perception is that we have this inner monologue, this consciousness that we can talk to, and it allows us to think, and that thinking helps us develop the intelligence that we have to make stuff and society. And the Stoned Ape Theory is really around how, we evolved from monkeys who presumably don't have that level of consciousness. But what happens if you give a monkey psychedelics? Might they be able to, especially if over time those animals are able to evolve and kind of selectively breed and reproduce, are psychedelics actually a thing that makes us more have more fitness, and using the genetics terms. And if you have more fitness, then you're going to breed and reproduce and evolve into potentially something different. So that's the theory, in that psychedelics actually caused that. There's a lot of evidence that lots of animals use psychedelics. One of my favorite stories around this are elephants. Of course, elephants are these wonderfully wise animals that they have this wisdom that humans don't really understand, and they can find water where they shouldn't be able to, and they can walk hundreds of miles to do that, and that's shared between generations. And I was watching this beautiful documentary on elephants just because I'm into them, and they talked about how these elephants once a year make a pilgrimage to the beach because they have to eat this certain leaf that has salt water on it, because that's where they get salt in their diet. And they do it once a year, and they stock up, and then they walk back into the jungle. And it turns out these are the leaves of the iboga plant that it creates ibogaine, which I think is on my t-shirt here. Yeah, that one.
Known as one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful psychedelic.
Yeah. And so these elephants, and the documentary this was on Netflix, this beautiful elephant documentary. It's not about psychedelics, but they just talk about this experience, this pilgrimage that the elephants make. They eat the iboga leaf, and then they do like ceremonies with their clan, because it's a lot of elephants from different places that come together. So it's, like the Burning Man of elephants coming to the beach once a year, and then they all go back to their respective areas. So of course the narrator is talking about, what if these psychedelics are actually contributing to the consciousness that elephants bring, that we know so little about, but what we do know is that they're incredibly wise animals.
What's some more history around psilocybin that you could share, maybe from the legal side of things? When you went to the Philippines, I think it was my understanding that the Philippines might be legal there or decriminalized. It's the way that it is in the U.S. and many Western places where it's like Schedule 1. It's not the same way in many places of the world. There's many places of the world where many of these sacred plant medicines are legal. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah. And I think I heard you wrong. So in the Philippines, it is illegal.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought it was illegal. Okay.
No, it was a big risk bringing it there. And my mom actually was the one who smuggled it in, because she's a tiny old Filipino lady. And she was like, they're not going to care about me, but you're like an American guy.
Putting it in capsules, that's a very safe smart way to do it.
Yeah. So that was certainly a big risk. But yeah, the general history of psilocybin in the West is that, well, there's lots of evidence showing that humans have been taking psilocybin mushrooms for as long as we can date back. But Western culture had really lost that tradition. And it was rediscovered in the 50s by a banker who went down to Mexico and sat with some elders there. Maria Sabina was a carrier of this medicine, and a medicine woman who shared it with him.
And Mexico's an area where this like tradition and lineage really comes from.
Yeah, and she was in a village in the mountains of Oaxaca, and where still villages to this day use these medicines in ceremony, and shared it with him. And he went back and he wrote an article in Time magazine and coined the term magic mushrooms in that article. And it started the article was about his hunt for these magic mushrooms, and he found them in Oaxaca. And sadly, in the 60s, in the psychedelic craze, as LSD was becoming popularized, Westerners, Americans, were making it down to Mexico, to these small villages, to try to sit with these medicine people, and actually did a lot of harm coming down there. And so within the psychedelic community, there's a lot of reverence given to paying respect for these people who have carried the lineage of the medicine. We wouldn't have found it unless they held on to it. And also, paying reciprocity for it. Our wealth is staggering in comparison to theirs in a lot of cases. And just not misappropriating its use. And so psilocybin in particular kind of has that lineage attached to it. But with the psychedelic movement of the 60s, and of course that created the anti-establishment movement that my parents talked about, which was a big part of our society in America, motivated the war on drugs and made these things illegal. The war on drugs made them illegal, and put them in Schedule 1 status, which is defined by the DEA as having no therapeutic benefit and high potential for abuse.
What is your conspiracy around, or beliefs around, why these were made Schedule 1?
Well, the 50s were all about a lot of conformity, a lot of white picket fence, and moving into the suburbs and kind of creating the American dream. And the 60s, I didn't live through any of this, right? But this is like what I assume in hearing about how this went down. In the 60s, Vietnam War, the psychedelic movement really propelled the backlash against the conformity and that society was heading into. And that created a lot of tension, right? Tension between the establishment, big companies, government, our parents, like the establishment, and what the younger people were doing. And Ronald Reagan said that Timothy Leary, who was one of the pioneers of the psychedelic movement and really popularized the use of LSD, was the most dangerous man in the country. Yeah, wanted to crush this uprising of new ways of thinking and being, because it was quite radical. people were talking about like, let's spike the water supply. And LSD is such a potent chemical that you don't have to get a lot into people. We're talking like micrograms before they have full-blown psychedelic experiences. And so I don't believe we should spike the water supply. I think these things should be used with intentionality, not against people's wills. But there were talks like that in that time. And I don't blame them, right? There are countries at war and people are dying, and it was a crazy time to live in. And so I think it was more of a social backlash and a way for the government to use their power of law to try to quell that. There's a long history within the drug war that have a lot of other things intertwined with it, racism and things like that we could certainly talk about. But I think regarding psilocybin and LSD and these psychedelics, I think that's probably the most applicable thread to pull on there. They were made illegal back then in the 60s and 70s. And when they were first discovered, when LSD was first discovered, it was actually created by a pharmaceutical company, and it was given out to psychologists for them to figure out what to do with it. They were like, hey, this does something incredible in our brains, but we don't know what it was. And before the term psychedelic was around, it was called a psychomimetic, which is to mimic a psychotic state. And so therapists and psychiatrists were thinking, we can use these medicines to actually figure out what's going on in someone's mind who has schizophrenia or psychosis. And if we can make a temporary psychotic state, we might be able to figure out how to get someone out of that. They realized that's not actually what's going on. It kind of looks like that from the surface, but yeah, it's not the same thing. And so they evolved, but they kind of escaped the lab, as we say. They escaped the research side of it and started being used by this counterculture. But the origins of psychedelics in America in the 50s and 60s were used in a therapeutic setting. Were trying to be used to figure out how to help people with mental illness. There's actually a province in Canada, Saskatchewan, that did a lot of research on using LSD for alcohol use disorder. And they made it a standard of care paid for by the provincial government, by their health system in Canada, as a standard care for someone who had alcohol use disorder. So there's this history of using it for therapy and for serious mental illness. And then drug wars make them illegal. The clinical research really dies off because clinical research is often funded by the NIH, the NIMH. So that all dries up, and no one touches psychedelics in a clinical setting for a long time. They go underground, which of course they've been used amply in the underground for, since then. But about 15, 20 years ago, a few pioneering researchers, Roland Griffiths, among others, he was at Johns Hopkins, picked it back up and had the courage to ask for IRB approval to get their study approved, and started doing research again. And a lot of the research has stayed away from LSD because of the stigma that the 60s brought around LSD, and is focused more on psilocybin because it's comes from the ground.
Hey, I just wanted to jump in here and give a quick shout out to the sponsor of today's podcast, B Micro, the easiest way to sneak vegetables into any meal. Due to soil depletion, GMOs, and monocropping, Americans are not getting enough nutrients. So in 2018, I founded B Micro, the first freeze-dried microgreens company in the US to help Americans get more concentrated natural nutrients into their diet. Microgreens are a phase in the plant's life when they're 14 days old and naturally the most concentrated in vitamins, minerals, nutrients, all the good things that we need. Our microgreens are grown here in the US in soil in a greenhouse. They're certified USDA organic and regenerative organic. We grow, wash, and freeze dry them to extend their 1-week shelf life to over 1 year, allowing us to ship anywhere in the US without the worry of spoilage. We have 2 flavors, broccoli, backed by over 2,000 studies on sulforaphane and its powerful detox benefits, and a blend of red cabbage, radish, and broccoli, the most potent detox formula we've tested, offering you the most bang for your buck. Easily sneak these microgreens in any meal. Eggs, smoothies, pizza, pasta, even your kids' mac and cheese, you can't even taste it. Use code STEVE15 to save at bmicro.farm.